What's up, y'all? I got another little Dariacore tutorial for you today. This one's a kind of bouncy, high energy one, and with that, let's go ahead and get into it. So we'll start with this little stutter layer here. It's made up of a couple things. It's got this little glitchy layer. And that is made from this sample that I took right here, pitched down 8 semitones. And the way that I made this sample originally was I took my full Ex Machina track, ran it through some effects units, and then I think it was a couple multi-passes, put a couple OTTs on it, and then just ended up with this like synth soup type sound. And as you can see, there's a lot of left-right differences in the sound here, right? These are the two channels, left's louder, left and right are out of phase here. So I ended up with the glitchy little stutter and just ran it through a couple processing things, just an OTT, a limiter, really slamming it out. There's a lot of compression on this and a pretty non-existent attack, so there's no attack at all. The release is a little bit longer, and then just push the gain way up. Right, so ended up with a nice uniform volume for the different loudnesses of the clips here, and then just send it through a V clip. Then the next layer to this is going to be this 3OSC layer right here. And as you can see, it follows the same pattern as the little glitchy clip does, just some different notes being used, and it is just a square wave. Nothing changed in here other than making it into a square wave. Then I added a tiny little volume envelope to make it a little less attacky and shorter tails, and then just sent it through a couple effects. Nothing too complicated here. First, vintage chorus on 2 mode, brought the wetness down, send it into a little bit of a tilt curve, boosting the highs, cutting the lows down, and then pretty heavy wave shaping, just almost like a soft clip or a light distortion, maybe a saturation there. So then we have this third layer, sounds like this. And what I did here was took this sample, just kind of like a little FME lead, put a volume envelope on it. Well, first thing, I actually changed the root pitch here to be correct, right? The sample's in E, so I changed it to E, so all these notes that I hit are going to be the correct pitch. Then went in here to the envelope, sustain all the way up, no attack, and just that means whenever you hold the note down, the volume stays on. So then the snap heap is just a transgate set to 1/32, which is the same rate as these notes here, so it's just giving it the same short little stutter pattern, low pass, or I'm sorry, a high pass here with a high boost. Just making it a lot brighter, send it through a distortion. The only thing I did here was change the preamp to make it super chunky. Then we have another EQ. So let's bring in each of these 3 layers one at a time. So we started out with our glitch layer. Then we add in our 3OSC square layer. Then we add in the deploy lead, even though it's not named right here. Right, just giving a nice high-pitched stutter type effect to this. Then the last thing that I did here was boosted the side channel, the highs, and an even higher bump to it, basically so that when I send it into my clipper, instead of boosting the input gain there, I could actually just select that I wanted just the side highs boosted. So and then as far as composition goes for this, our stutter layer just follows our chords and mutes out whenever we're doing the little bass fills right here. You know, second half repeats, and then we get into our second part of this little drop or whatever. Right, and so we just got rid of those stutters in there, and then also I do believe I changed the pattern on the second half just to kind of freshen it up, give it a new sound. As you can see, the notes are different there, and I do extend out this A to follow with this super long hit on the chord stack. So next, before we move into our chord stack, I did want to say real quick, for the glitch fills, same exact sample that we used up here to do our little glitchy stutter, except I have just made it a little, you know, the clips are a little bit longer. And then the processing on these is a little bit different. We have a heavy compressor again, but then a little bit of a mid cut going on here. And then I have a stereo shaper, which this configuration right here is just going to bring these sides in. So let me turn this off. Right, very wide, a lot of movement to it. Less wide, less movement, but still a little bit of movement there. Especially on this one right here. Right, you see how it's mostly in the right ear, but then we turn this stereo shaper on, and it just kind of goes right to mid. And I've even automated this right into left, so that the right channel, which is this quieter channel here, into the left one, gets a little bit louder, and just, you know, we could turn it way up and it would even go into the other channel some, but that's a little too loud for my liking. And finally, just put it through an OTT. So now let's move into our chord stack. And for our chord stack, we have 3 different layers going on. First, we have our little bass running through there. Then we have this this is my mid saw layer, but I named it Losif. Shout out to my coworker Joseph. I don't know, I think he had an influence on that, though I don't know what it might be. And as you can see here, we're doing a little 1 2 3 double stutter, double stutter on the other half. We got our sub note bending pretty high up at the end of each of these to go with our little glitch filler. Then lastly, we have this FM layer. Let me go back to the beginning. Right, and so that repeats for this second 4 bars. Ooh, damn. A hard sneeze right there, man. So then for our second half of notes here, we have basically it's a dotted half configuration here. So if we had like a dotted half note going on, we're basically just cutting it into, you know, half note, quarter note, half note, quarter note, half note, quarter note, half note, quarter note, and then we kind of do a little Missy Elliott, flip it and reverse it here, where it goes quarter note, half note, quarter note, half note, quarter note. And I think I should have probably made this a quarter note, half note as well. I might fix that in the final version, but yeah. And then with these notes here, we just kind of bend up and let it extend out until we get to the next part. So as you can see here, like we started missing the first 2 notes. So instead of like having this pattern go back a little further, I thought it was a cool little switch just to have it extend and sustain all the way into this next part. And then for the FM layer, this one is just changing notes each time. So okay, so let's get into the sound design on these. We'll start with the old Losif. And so this one I took a preset and did a couple modifications to it. I'm kind of not going to go too in depth here because I've showed a good number of these saw patches that I do. And none of them are too wildly different. So right, that's the patch that we're working on now. So it's just got a little bit of noise, J60, the standard saw oscillators, down 2 octaves, down 2 octaves. This octave switch turns it up 1 full octave, and you can do that in the semitones space so that you're not having to kind of manually find where your octave's at. You just put it in there and turn it all the way up, whoops, and you go up a full octave. Then we have 16 voices in A, detuning a little less than the default there. Then 15 voices in the second oscillator. We've turned the sync up to 3 exactly, which makes it a octave and a perfect 5th up. If I solo that out real quick. Right, that's kind of our ravey layer. The first one is kind of our really mid-heavy layer. Then 15 voices on this one helps that center voice to be its own kind of unique voice on this one. Nothing changed on the levels, just a MG low 6, filter here. So then we have a flanger, hyper dimension expander with only the hyper module being used, 7 voices, pretty low detuning, no rate. So just really, I mean, not doing too much there. It's kind of just giving it a phasey quality because the voices are so close to each other and not modulating at all. Then we have a hard clipper, 50-50 on the wetness and drive. Then a multi-band compressor. Kind of just taming the volume there. I don't think I even changed anything on this. Yeah. Then we go into our effects and we have a Pro Q3 cutting the lows out and then cutting the high side, as like remember we did with the Stutter EQ here. I've boosted my side and side, and that's because we have a lot of elements going on here. We have vocals, we have we have a 3-patch stutter, we have a 3-patch saw thing, like a saw bass, you know, chord layer. So I wanted to make sure that there was some space for this little stutter to actually be heard. And so the way I did that was just cutting these sides out on this mid saw layer, sending it through a destructor. Right, so this is where all that distortion's coming from, that and the wave shaper. Right, so up to that point, it's really just kind of a saw patch. Taking some of that brightness out, then distorting it. Just Harmer Classic distortion with like 50% wet, or a little less than 50 wetness. A way raised preamp. So preamp all the way up and then brought the mix down. Then our wave shaper. Really heavily saturating it there. Right, I boosted the preamp. There we go. So then my next layer is going to be this saturated bass patch layer. And so what this one is another saw patch. We have this LFO on envelope mode with a half rate, modulating the level and the ARP pink, and then that ARP is getting, that pink noise ARP is getting sent through a bandpass filter that's being modulated a little bit, right, which just kind of helps it get cleaned up a little bit and be less overly noisy. Then we have the same LFO there modulating a low pass filter and a flanger. And so that flanger is bringing in a little bit of width, but nothing insane. And it's just modulating the depth there. With the rate being off, if you modulate the depth, it just changes your different flanger positions, right? The flanger's not moving, so when you change the depth, that means, or the phase, that means that you're moving where one of the flanger's positions is at, I believe. Don't quote me on that. All right, then we have the diode distortion going through distortion first. I'm sorry, going through the filter first, then the distortion. That's what the pre-knob means. It's a low pass, a little bit of drive, full wetness, and then that's being sent into an OTT. Let me turn these off and we can kind of bring them in one at a time. We have an OTT, right? That's before. Then with the OTTs, boosting the lows, boosting the highs a little bit. Then a patch, a EQ here, boosting those low mids, which is unique for this one. And then just kind of boosting the highs and cutting them at a certain point. Then a clipper, just really slamming it out. So as you can see, I put a lot of input gain on this and brought the ceiling down a good amount. And that just helps it kind of sound like more of a distorted sub bass. Then lastly, we have this FM layer that sounds like that. And it is a kind of unique patch that I use a lot of the times. It's called FM Nasty. The way that it works is I have oscillator A is down 3 octaves and 2 semitones. Oscillator B is down 2 semitones. Oscillator A is the sound source. Oscillator B is the FM source. It's modulated at 50%. So frequency modulation at 50%. And you may say, why is your semitones brought down by 2 on each of these? And that is because with it being 2 semitones down, it is correcting it. So I'm playing a C there. I'm going to play C again. And it thinks it's a D. And it is a D. That's why. Because that FM is kind of changing the root pitch of that. So it's just, you know, kind of correcting for our FM. So I still get to have a nice FM sound, but I don't have to like struggle to get the melody in the correct pitch. FMing a lot of the times, like sometimes it's good to have that weird note change that the FMing does to it. And then for this patch, it's just meant to be a correct FM layer. So then going through our effects here in Serum, we have a little low 6 filter, boosting the tip of it a little bit, the top part. Gonna run through these pretty quickly. Then we have envelopes on the mix knobs of these two. That's giving it all the width that I think it has. Yeah. Right. And then we have a sine shaper, crusting it up. Not too much though. Then just a little boost, a high bump there with that EQ. Then I'm cutting a little bit of the lows out, boosting the mids and the highs, getting it nice and crispy. So yeah, so I sent it through this EQ and then I just put it into a wave shaper. Again, pushing the pre way up and soft clipping it, or whatever kind of clipping you'd call that, maybe soft clipping. And that's our 3 layers. So then as far as composition here, we have a couple things that change. So our notes don't change right there too much. That's our little patch that we just had change. It's actually the same notes. We just moved this octave knob that I showed in the patch for the mid saw bass, right? This turns up and makes it like shinier. And then lastly, we have this little pitch bend that just modulates these 3. Right? It modulates all 3 of the Serum's pitch bend knob, which I've changed to 12, an octave up and an octave down. So let's move on to the drums. Then we have our little kick zap pattern here. Our kicks are kind of working as our low end here. There's a side chain attached to the kicks. And then the zaps just work almost like a high end and something to kind of fill that mid range that a snare would take up. I don't have a side chain on those, but they're just doing a pretty basic pattern here. And then for the second half of this, we switch to more on the floor, almost like hard style drum pattern. And bring in this little kind of clunky snare. And then before I kind of get too deep into this, let's talk about how I'm doing these zaps here. So I have a couple different samples. That one's like a little bit of a high pitched one. That's kind of a more ticky one, and I've just gone in here and changed the length to not go so low. See how that's going into the bass ranges? I've done a lot to control the bass here. As you can see, we have an EQ. And then we're just cycling through these 3 different kinds. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And does, you know, that same exact pattern over and over again. But since we have so many different elements, it doesn't sound repetitive. Going into our second half, we just have this more zappy laser, and you can get zappier lasers by making them with like saws and squares, whereas like sine waves are going to be more clear and less crunchy. So this is a saw zap that I made out of a saw wave. And then for our hats, I'm going to really spend like no time at all on these. We just basically have this going. And kind of setting our, almost like a metronome here. Then in the second half, we just bring in another hat. And as you can see, our hats, they come in here and are like bringing the tempo up on this without, you know, changing the tempo, but just bringing the intensity up. I have a pitch fade that goes to where the pitch is turned up. You can kind of see that. And then when we get to our little, it goes down. Let me just get that. Right, so just kind of following our other elements, keeping everything as one unit. And that's going to do it for this one, y'all. This isn't the final version of this track, so if it does end up changed, please don't hate the whatever changes I make to it. And thanks, and I will see y'all in the next one.